guys and girls, my name is Gray, and this is another episode of the Gray Av podcast. And today is kind of a special day. We make our 50th episode, so this is episode number 50. And adding to that, we have an exciting guest, somebody that I've been always looking forward to have on the podcast. And some of you might know from listening to some of the early podcasts when I started. And it just happened that it happened. And the way it actually came together to happen would make its own podcast episode just to explain that, which I'll probably do at one point. But our guest today is Katlego Maphai, who is the co-founder and CEO of Yoco. And for some of you who are in South Africa might be familiar with Yoco, and some of you might not, obviously, if you're not in South Africa especially. These guys are helping small businesses to accept card payments. And just to give you some context on that, small business enterprises drives 50% of South Africa's GDP, but the card payments that the banks came up with kind of were meant to serve the bigger businesses. And these guys came in to help the small businesses, and they're doing really well at it. So I was always curious. It's one of the exciting startups in South Africa right now. So I always wanted to speak to Katlego, and it happened. So we went through the whole story on how they got started, to launching, to actually reaching as many people as they reaching now and growing, as well as his personal story on how he got started, obviously. And just off the top of my head, one of the things that I learned, or a few things I learned from Katlego, long-term thinking. He seems to be a very long-term thinker. He thinks kind of ahead of time a little bit. What will things look like, say 2 years from now, or even longer than that? Which is I think it's a very good trait for any kind of person, especially entrepreneurs out there. And we covered some of his philosophies in leadership and the culture that they have, or they're always building at Yoco, and recruiting. What are the things that they look for at Yoco? What are the traits and qualities that make them hire someone or not to hire someone? And how do they assess to find those things in the candidates? And of course, we talked about routine, which is a subject that I like to cover with different type of people on this podcast. But he doesn't seem to follow any kind of daily routine, and his reasons about that are very fascinating. So I hope you can pick up something from that as well. So without further ado, I don't want to waste anyone's time. Enjoy my podcast with Katlego. And also, there's one thing that I'm starting to do, whereas before I do an interview with a guest, I will be sending emails to my subscribers to ask what kind of questions would you like to ask. Like previously, I would have probably done that with Katlego. Say, look, next week I'm having a podcast with Katlego. What would you like to ask him? So I'll be doing that through my email list. So if you want to be part of the list to be able to ask questions to all the guests that I have on the podcast, or to have some kind of input, just make sure you subscribe through the website, and donzo, you'll be in my email list. Other than that, stay awesome and enjoy my podcast with Katlego.
So in a simple sense, Yoco is an easy way for small businesses, whether it's mom and pops or businesses that hire a few people, to accept card payments. We have a point-of-sale application that works on Android or iOS, and then we have 2 mobile card readers, so an option of 2 card readers that connect to your phone via Bluetooth. And the combination of the 2 things allows you to accept card payments easily, whether it's at the store or on the go. And the point-of-sale application gives you a taste of insights into your business. We've also gone beyond payments. We have a business portal where you can see some analytics and some trends within your business. In terms of the sort of broader value proposition, I think what really sets us apart is the speed at which you can get the device and the accessibility of it, right? So, you go online, yoco.co.za, you literally spend less than 10 minutes signing up, picking a reader. We do all the checks in the background, no paperwork, and within 2 to 3 days you have a machine and you can start transacting. Nobody could really claim that in the past. We've really removed all the barriers and made it as simple as possible. And then I guess just also the model. So we don't charge any monthly fees. You buy the card reader once off. We have a flat transaction fee. It sort of drops as you grow automatically, which is quite nice. And then I guess to wrap it all up, it's just a great experience. We have a proactive support model. So if something's going wrong, we actually call you first because our data tells us, which has been quite great. I think, typically, a company builds a product, they give it, they sell it, right? And they sort of leave you to your own devices. But because we don't take a fixed monthly fee, we're incentivized to ensure that our merchants are growing and are doing well and they're transacting.
Right.
And that's kind of changed the way we relate to them.
Right.
Yeah.
That's, I think, a precise explanation.
Cool.
So it's basically the same as we use the ATM machines, well, not ATM machines, but like the card readers at the merchants.
Correct.
So it just made the whole process quite simplified.
Simplified, easy to use, no fixed costs. And I think important thing to note here is that for the consumers at the merchant, there's no change in behavior. So, when it comes to payments, we've realized, and history tells us that whenever something has to be adopted or there has to be a change in consumer behavior, the adoption becomes quite niche. So we thought it was really important, particularly in South Africa, where you have sort of a 75% card penetration rate amongst adult South Africans, that these very consumers didn't have to change behavior when they were interacting with their merchants.
Right. So it's kind of like, it sounds obvious to do that, keeping in mind that we already had card readers, but why was the process so complicated? Was it like a regulatory thing, or has it never been simple like this before?
I guess everything has its origins, right? And the traditional banking institutions used to offer card machines. They also used to issue card as they do.
Yeah.
And that comes with all the levels of institution, right? So with the card machines that these institutes offer, you can only get them on a sort of rental. You never own the machine, right? So you can only get them on a rental basis per month. And in that sense, there was a credit check that needed to happen in order for you to get the machine. So that added quite a few layers. And then, to protect themselves against risk, they made sort of the steps and the requirements quite onerous, which were quite sort of discriminatory to smaller businesses or even to startups, right? You need a trading history and all the like. And then everything, thank you very much. Everything was also predicated on a salesman coming to see you, which in itself has its own costs. And whenever you have a scenario like that, a salesperson is always going to prioritize a larger business, right? Yes. Predictable volumes, all this type of stuff. So I guess we sort of flipped all these things on their head. We looked at the mobile industry, where a couple of us are from. And we said, you can walk into a Vodacom or an MTN, and you can pick a mobile phone and ask for a contract, and within sort of 30 to 45 minutes you're approved and you can take it and you can walk out. Yes. Why can't the same principle apply to accepting card payments? And that was our paradigm, right? And that helped us to design around that paradigm and even sort of overshoot on those requirements. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so now that's, I guess that's the problem that you're solving.
Yes.
Using the strategy, but how did the initial idea came through?
So these things, right? It's never just one thing.
Yeah.
I think we're 4 founders in the business. I'm the CEO. There's Lungis, our CTO. Yeah. We knew each other from childhood. We reconnected at University of Cape Town, and then this Carl wasn't. We used to work at the same consultancy or telecoms advisory firm. And then there's Bradley Watrous, who's our CFO. And we met at a German incubator for online startups, Rocket Internet. So, it's interesting. We actually came together as friends and as a team, and then we started looking at different business models. And I think the idea for this business model came from the US, so Square, a company founded by Jack Dorsey, co-founder of Twitter, sort of pioneered this mobile acceptance space. I had seen it in 2011 during one of my annual trips. I used to live in the Bay Area as a kid. And I saw it again in 2012, but the technology had really proliferated, right? Taxis, restaurants, and all these things. But it wasn't until I was with my best friend and we walked into a sort of hole-in-the-wall barbecue eatery. Really nothing on the countertop, no till.
Where, in the Bay or here?
In San Francisco, yeah.
Okay.
And this African American lady brings out the food and asked my friend how he wanted to pay. And I was confused by the question. I assumed it was a cash on you place, right? And my friend said he wanted to pay by card. And the lady took out her Android device, stuck in the Square dongle, took his card, swiped it, he signed with his finger, and then just the light bulbs just started going off in my head, right? So I'd seen the technology, I'd seen it grow, but it was the first time I really understood its impact. So, here was a business with a good product, nothing much else. Now they were able to accept a digital payment. They were able to accept a larger basket size. I don't think my friend was carrying $40 of cash in his pocket. And, the lady was running her business from her phone. And it all just clicked. And then, I think after that, the obsession started to grow. We had the team, we had the context, the timing was right. And we went for it. We started looking at this really deeply towards the end of 2012. It took us another 2 years to get to market, but
Impressive.
Thank you.
When I saw it, I was like, man, it just made sense to me, especially when you consider even the crime rate here, the small nation. So this is pretty much a smart idea. Yeah. So when I saw it, I think a few years ago, it felt like one of those technologies that just come for a moment and they go. So
right.
Eventually, I was like, okay, this thing keeps on growing and it's everywhere now.
Yeah.
So it's quite cool. But
Thank you.
How did you move? Well, I'm just curious to know exactly the process of how. Okay, you're in a store. Yeah, it made sense to you. Yeah. This is what you would want to do. That's a problem that you want to solve and bring it down to South Africa.
Yes.
But what was the first thing that you did, to actually say, let's start a company, and what was the process there?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I was a management consultant. I was working, across the continent in different markets, and just kind of the combination of the international firm I was working for, and these high growth markets, just kind of awoke this entrepreneurial spirit, right? Which I didn't know was there, to be frank. And then sort of came this decision to get into entrepreneurship, and Carl, our chief business officer, and I made the decision together. Lungi had always been an entrepreneur. He started one of the world's first mobile voice over IP. That's right. Yeah. Right. So, that was always there, and he just exited this company, and Bradley and I had just met in this entrepreneurial context at Rocket Internet. So all of a sudden, here are these four guys who know each other with the complementary skills that were looking for a business model. And after Rocket, the intention was to start a company. Rocket was really seen as a segue from sort of the corporate consulting world into entrepreneurship. Right. And so that was kind of step one, right? The intent was there. There was a desire, and then the business model almost found us, right? We looked at other things. We were going to start a wine bar or so. But it just came back, and it really seemed to complement our skills. And then, just sort of taking this concept or this desire into something real. It's just, I see it as like a set of sort of very small steps, right? But I guess the crescendo was sort of initially thinking we would partner with a European or Berlin-based MPOS player called SumUp to bring SumUp to South Africa, and to sort of that being a possibility, and we really took that down the line, and then one day deciding like, hold on, actually we can do this ourselves, like what are we afraid of? And then we took that step, and then the craziness really started, because when we examined the landscape, we basically figured out that if we didn't focus on cracking the access problem, we wouldn't be solving any problem, right? So we first thought it was a sort of a technology, there's a new technology, it's going to make things more cost effective, and that's kind of what we're solving for. But ultimately we realized that it was actually access that we were solving for, and that wasn't primarily being driven by cost. It was actually being driven by the rules that sort of determine who could and could not get a card machine. Yeah. And we're like, well, we need to have control over that gateway and those rules. And at that point, sort of after consulting, we knew that we needed to get what is known as an aggregation license. It's basically a license that allows us to contract directly with our merchants. Right. So that's something that sets us apart. We're the first startup in the country to be given that type of a license. It took a year to get, so we moved up to Johannesburg to lobby one of the 6 card acquiring banks to do that, the smallest. And we got that, and that's at the core of Yoco. It took us a year to get it, but after that, we were able to build the company and our operating model around this flexibility that we could control who can come on and off the platform. And our ability to sign up a merchant in less than 10 minutes is linked back to this license, right? And the fact that we control that experience, and there isn't an institution that's determining who can come on and off our platform. So once again, these are like all very long steps. And I guess at the core of it is this long-term thinking, right? So we think very, very long-term. We could never benefit from instant gratification. There was no MVP in our business, and as a result, we think of this business in very long horizons. And when you do that, the decisions you make, right? Like, so taking a year to get a license so you can contract with your merchants doesn't seem that bad, because that 1 year you compare it to the next 10 or 20 years and you're like, well, it's completely worth it, right? So it's definitely something that sets us apart. Even right now, the planning that we're doing is once again looking at very long horizons and looking at the future. And it's important that you do that, otherwise you're not going to be able to compete over the long term.
Right. Cool. So what was the reaction from the merchants, for example, who couldn't probably previously get access to card machines to do those transactions?
It was cool. I mean, it was interesting. When we first started looking at this, first of all, there was no word like fintech. Number 2, it was such a foreign concept. So we had to spend almost sort of the first half an hour of every meeting explaining what this was, right? And then what happened between sort of those early days and when we actually went to market was a bunch of other players launched, right? So it was the Nedbank Pocket Pause, which launched in early 2013. And then you had the Absa Pebble, which launched later that year. And then the following year you had Ikoka, ZipZap. So all these guys came, and obviously that made us quite nervous. But interestingly enough, you're at SnapScan, right? Yeah. Interestingly enough, all of a sudden there was kind of, particularly because of the banks and all the marketing they'd done, there was almost this trust around the space, right? So when we started off, nobody knew about it, and to when we started piloting, people had a sense of what this was all about. So that was kind of a big hurdle that was solved on our behalf, and some nice last move advantage. And then in terms of the reaction from the merchants, so we now have 9,000 plus merchants on the platform, and we're adding close to 1,000 a month now. The most important thing about this number is that 70% plus had never accepted card payments before. It's one of our key variables.
Yeah, that's exactly.
And we actually want to grow that variable. We're in the business of creating a market, not cannibalizing one, right? And so we're speaking to a cohort or a segment of the market that's never really been spoken to before, right? Like, people aren't really building products for small businesses.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? So that's been quite fascinating for us, like, delivering a product that's been built bottom up for a segment that's never been spoken to before. And there's been a long answer to your question, but like, I think what I'm trying to get to here is it's been really positive, right? 9,000 plus entrepreneurs that knew nothing about each other, or now sitting on a platform. We're entrepreneurs too. We're also an SME. And like, often the problems we solve internally are things that we productize and we offer to our merchants, right? Around automation and all this type of stuff. There's sort of the card acceptance, the electronic payments, but then we're taking a lot of these businesses from pen and paper, Excel at best, through to the cloud, right? They're using like a cloud-based software as a service solution that's connected to a piece of hardware. And they're really embracing it, right? And that's exciting for us because, once again, this was a previously ignored sort of dark segment of the economy, and now we're showing that it's real and that it's active. And South Africa's economy just slipped into recession now, and when we look at our merchants, they're growing, right? And it's because they're relevant to their communities. So they're offering relevant products and services. They're dynamics. They're resilient. They employ. We really believe in this part of the economy.
Right, absolutely. To me, it's what's still exciting. It's the fact that I was always thinking about, well, why don't the small merchants have card payments, especially because of the security problem that I mentioned. Because I used to have a friend of mine who had a store like that, and then growing, but then he always had problems with robbery and stuff like that. Cash. So right now he is on the platform, and it's cool that he can like that problem completely eliminated.
Also, what's also interesting is like your friend is now developing a digital footprint for his business.
Oh yeah,
right.
Sure.
And that's going to have a lot of currency in the future, right? When he has to get a loan or whatever, this data, this information, this history, this track record.
Absolutely.
And that's the stuff that excites us.
Oh yeah, sure. Just to clear to the people listening, then instead of keeping books or writing down what he has to do, it's hard, and also it's pretty tough for the organizations to actually approve things like that. Whereas you can just bring a spreadsheet from you guys, or whatever documents they can get, and then get whatever they need to get from there. So how did you move then from after the whole setup was made?
Yeah.
How did you switch with how did you come up with the hardware and the software team and stuff like that?
Yeah. So look, all the stuff started from the four of us. There were four distinct verticals that we needed to incubate. On my side, it was operations and customer experience,
right.
And org design, how we were structured as a business. On Bradley's side, he's an actuary, so he was looking at data and risk. Lungisa, technology and product, and Carl on commercial.
Right.
And sort of out of these four nodes and our customer journey, which we sort of drew out in a picture very early on, almost before we did anything else, we were able to design an organization around this picture. And we still do right now, right? Sort of everyone coming in is adding or enhancing or driving a touch point on the customer journey, right? And everyone. We don't have any sort of concept we don't have a support function in Yoco. Everyone is customer orientated at all levels, whether it's finance or the people team, whatever. It's all about the customers. Yeah. What's the point otherwise, right? That's what a business is there for. It's there to service customers and hopefully extract some value and grow, and ensure that everyone's really orientated around this. So that's helped us to build things in the right way, and I guess, yeah, the team now is sitting at about 60 full-time people, maybe 70 if you have sort of add in the interns and the part-timers and the like. So the team is starting to grow quite quickly. But once again, this is all orientated around the customer journey, which has been very helpful.
And like, did you grow up here?
Right. So yeah, I was born in Johannesburg, and then I moved to Cape Town when I was 4 years old, and then we moved to the US with my family. Actually, like a few months later after that, we spent 2 years there on the East Coast, so Cambridge, Princeton, and then we moved back to Cape Town. Spent a few years here, and then we moved to Palo Alto in California. Spent just over a year there. I went to high school in Pretoria, and then I went to ECT. I started my career in Johannesburg. Worked quite a bit across the continent, and then I spent my last bit of my consulting career in Dubai, just under a year there. So I've been darting around a lot. I think sort of on average I've been moving around every 5 years since I was a kid. But yeah, you can sort of hear that Cape Town is the place I kept coming back to. And yeah, I guess it kind of makes sense that we started a company here. Those are kind of my roots.
And why did you have to move to the US?
Academic parents. Mom studying, dad on sabbatical. Those are the main reasons, yeah.
And at UCT, what did you study?
I studied business science. I majored in information systems.
Oh, okay. So you got involved with Rocket Internet at one point, yeah?
Yes. So that was after my consulting career. And just before I started the entrepreneurial path. It wasn't long. It was like less than 6 months, but at Rocket, that's a long time.
Yeah.
That's how I met Bradley. We did a startup in Nigeria, business called Jumia. So we're part of the core team that set that up.
And then, what did you want to become when you was younger? Did you want to become an entrepreneur?
No, I never thought about it at all. If you went sort of to me a couple of years ago and said I was going to be an entrepreneur, I would have scoffed, right?
Yeah.
But then, I guess, kind of reflecting, quite an eclectic childhood, sort of moving around, having to adjust to new environments, and absorbing a lot. And this is one of my key skills right now, right? Being able to sort of look around, assess, and understand, how to get things done. I guess, that sort of eclectic background, bit of the Silicon Valley, some non-linear thinking, always made me probably not the best fit for sort of long-standing institutions. I clicked at some point that I just needed to build my own space in order to thrive. And that was a big driver, right? I think something I'm really proud of at Yoco is how we've taken diversity in the workplace as a source of competitive advantage, not something to be complied to. In the team, we naturally, as a collective, think about our environment in the way that it functions, right? We don't have to contrive understanding our world, and that's a huge advantage. So that was an experiment for me that I wanted to run, and I'm super happy to see it working. We build relevant things. It's because we're diverse in the inside.
Okay. So one thing that I picked up of you saying that you're not, they actually static space isn't really your game to stay at one place for quite a long time.
Yeah.
So for a person who is exactly like you, for example, in that sense, then how do you design Yoco as an environment that would sustain that kind of person? Is that accommodated?
For sure. So I think it starts in your operating model, the way you set up. The moment you set up the typical tree structure with reporting lines and silos, you're going to keep everyone where they belong. We've designed the company to almost function in rings and circles, right? So, or domains. And as a result, domain can appear and it can disappear. It can stay. It can it can become whatever. Anything can become whatever it needs to. At the center of it all is the customer journey. As an example, last year I set up a team called Expansion, which I head up, and its sole responsibility is to break into new markets. And as an example, that's allowed me to remain energized in something that's important, right? So, starting new things, building, incubating, and moving on to the next. There's a couple of other examples like this in the company where there's just so much agility in what needs to happen that people can really do what they want or what they need to do, as long as it's oriented around the customer journey.
Yes.
Yeah.
And with your experience in the corporate, what would you say you have learned there, or what you think you wouldn't have known if you didn't go there, now looking at Yoco at the moment?
So it's two things. I learned two things. So, on sort of the positive side is, how to be polished and to ensure that whatever you're putting out, presenting, just like shines, right? And like really glistens. And it's easy to understand and well communicated. So I think that environment can really teach you that. And when you have the amount of stakeholders that we do, whether it's investors, partners, at all suppliers, vendors, at all levels, recruiting, this is very important, right? What people see and perceive becomes the truth.
Yeah, sure.
And what you want is that to reflect what's really going on inside the organization, right? You don't want there to be a delta in that because you didn't sort of present something properly, or you didn't take the time to really buff something. So that's on the positive side. On the other side is learning what not to do, right?
Right.
Which is just as important. In fact, I think I've actually derived a lot of my lessons from that, right? So sort of how not to treat people like cogs, how to sort of allow people to play to their strengths and not to kind of sort of focus on their weaknesses. That's, I think, completely irrelevant, right? Everyone has some sort of unique contribution to make, and it's your job to understand what that is and where that fits into the organization. Sort of hopping on about what somebody doesn't know or what they're not good at, it's just a waste of time. So yeah, I think kind of these are some of the things, and then also just treating people like adults. It sounds obvious, but I really get surprised at how often within institutions, like this is sort of nanny babying, you arrive at this time, you leave at this time, you eat lunch at this time, you do this, you do that. And then what's ultimately happening is that the organization is designing its guidelines and policies around the bottom 5% and applying it to the whole team. And then if you treat people like children, they'll start acting like children, right? And you start sort of this self-perpetuating cycle.
Yeah.
We are very clear that we treat everyone like an adult. And if somebody doesn't want to behave like one, it's not the right organization for them, but the company's not going to change for them, right? So that's been exciting for me to see, once again, that materialize. Even the most junior person really being mature, acting like an adult, looking after themselves, being self-directed. And then when you have that sort of mindset embedded, you start seeing pockets of innovation at all levels of the business. It's not just sort of centered towards sort of a few people or senior level positions. But people are just like really taking grip of where they're going, and it's great to see. And I also think it really resonates quite a lot with millennials, right? They don't want to be told how to do something. They just want to know what the goal is, and they can figure out the rest. So, yeah.
Yeah, that sounds like a company that most millennials want to work for. And then, what would you say were the moments that I don't want to call them dark moments. That sound harsh, but like that made you almost feel like, oh, is this really going to happen? Or, one of those?
It's a couple. There's lots. They never stop. So, in the early days, it was not knowing whether we'd get the license. And we only knew sort of 9 months in that we were going to get it. So we could have failed before we even started, and we could have wasted 9 months of my life.
So what were you doing in that 9 months?
Basically preparing, we had to submit quite a lot of information for the due diligence at the bank. So that took a lot of work, and we were self-funded at the time. But yeah, you're kind of always staring failure in the face, and just even like conceiving of this idea that failing before you even starting, it's just like a lot to bear. So that was one, and then we got the license, and then the VC that was supposed to invest in us pulled out almost like a few days later.
South African VC?
Yeah. Right. And they pulled out, and we're like, geez, we're screwed, right? I remember that, but then, we just ended up going with angels, and that's actually worked out much, much better.
Right.
And then what else? Those kind of sort of being lost to market, being, wow, we're really late on this one. But then realizing actually we can learn from everyone else's mistakes, right? And then what else? There's tons more. I mean, getting rejected during fundraising, there was so many like difficult moments. But it's interesting, like once again, when you consider things over the long term, you sort of, instead of like trying to catch the highs and wallow in the lows, but just really focusing on remaining even-minded in the middle, even with the good and the bad, like you can ride out the stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
So then if, entrepreneurship seems like it's something that there's no an aha moment, I think working in a huge organization, you might want to get promoted. If you do that, it feels like, okay, I'm here now. But entrepreneurship feels like it's constantly going, So there's no rest time almost.
No.
In sense of like you never feel it's like safe enough or comfortable enough. So how do you stay sane? Like, because that's kind of a very lonely thing. Because you're the only person dealing with that.
Yeah. Well, I think it's probably the biggest challenge in entrepreneurship, to be honest, and the thing that sort of nobody can really warn you about, right? But in terms of staying sane, I think the trick is never getting too excited. Right? Because, falling from a peak to a low is a much longer drop than falling from the middle to the bottom, and vice versa, right? Like sort of going from a low to the middle is a much easier step than trying to move from a low to a super high. It's very dangerous. So you really just got to keep your emotions in check constantly. And when you do that, like, and not get carried away by the winds, you can keep yourself going. I'm not saying it's the supreme answer, but I think one of the big challenges I've seen in sort of in contemporary thinking around entrepreneurship is almost, there's so much content around it now. There's so much hype. There's blogs and meetups and all these things. And these things unfortunately give the illusion that like this is a template, right? Or there's a framework, and you follow this framework, everything will be good. And then you take that and you add this sort of lean startup mantra, which has completely been like taken to the wrong level, right? There's a difference between testing something and building something, and delivering a product. And what ends up happening is that you have this, startup as a framework construct, and then you have this, just get it out there, fail fast, just keep going, like learn. And then, as a business, you just end up in this like perpetual like sense of just doing, and getting it out there, and you don't take a step back, right? And then you're like, but I followed everything, but the customers like it, but yeah, the thing you built for 10 customers is not, or you tested with 10 customers, is not robust enough for 1,000 or 10,000, right? So I think there's no simple answers to these things, and if there were, then everyone would be doing it, right? And I think I've been concerned about how like all these things have just been reduced to these steps that you need to take. It's not like that.
10 steps to become an entrepreneur.
Yeah, exactly. And it really doesn't work like that, right? And anyone listening, you have to figure out this stuff. But in figuring out the stuff, this is how you come up with what makes your venture unique, right? That's your secret sauce. That's what you're developing. You can't import that.
Sure. Yeah. And then for the people who might want to get involved with Yoco, I don't know if you ever look, you're always constantly looking for new talent and stuff like that.
Yeah.
What are the traits that you look for?
It's a good question. So we love, first and foremost, people passionate about customers, passionate about SMEs, who believe that SMEs are the future of commerce in this region and beyond, right? So that's a starting point. The next one is somebody who's a self-starter, so self-directed, kind of looking to be enabled, not directed, right? Somebody who can just take a goal and they'll figure out how to get to that next point. And then I guess somebody who's just generally respectful. We really value respect at our company, and it permeates at all levels, right? It's respect to our customers, to your teammates, to our partners. If you have that as a core thing, it makes everything easier. Like, it facilitates bonds, it facilitates trust. And once you have those baseline sort of things in place, then you can get to the good stuff, right? It's kind of the plumbing before the poetry, and we see trust as core plumbing in any organization. Yeah.
Cool. So I have a two-side question now to that. Then how do you assess those for when hiring, and also how can somebody present that to you? Because for most companies it's still a checkbox. Okay, is there this? Check documents, check ABC, then done.
Yeah.
Which doesn't prove to be always effective.
So I guess something that we try to prioritize is like what we call keeping it in the family. So really encouraging staff to refer people within their network. Right. People that they know, people that they've vetted. That really helps, right? Because you kind of instantly know that from a cultural standpoint, you've actually taken you've ticked off a box. So that's really key. And then I guess in terms of our interview process, we typically have a sort of first round, getting to know the person, hearing their background, etc. And really, there what you're looking out for is honesty. Somebody being quite frank about how they've progressed and what's gone right and what's gone wrong. Are they volunteering that information, or sort of are they trying to steer the conversation?
Yeah.
And then what's also been interesting for us is we run what's known as a strength finder. So it's a Gallup strength finder, and simple assessment which basically looks at across 4 categories of execution, relationship, thinking, and influencing. What are somebody's top 5 unique strengths, and there are 34 of them. And very cool thing that we run, and it just gives us a hint into somebody's personality and what energizes them, right? And what's good about that is that if somebody's interviewing for an operations role, you're typically looking for somebody with good execution, good relationship, bonus if they have extra thinking skills, and then sort of you have that nice checkbox, and then we do a case study. think for me, case studies are very revealing. We make the case study relevant, and you really get an insight into how somebody thinks, how they structure their work, how they present their work, the level of care, how seriously they take the process. Like for me, the case study is super defining in terms of the person, and then in terms of the final round, we get sort of almost a culture police to start looking at the candidates, right? To like ask them more broader questions around why do they want to work at the organization. So it's not a foolproof system, but it's actually something we're really investing a lot into, right? Like into our recruiting process. We've brought it all in-house, and yeah, we're looking at it over the long term, and we really want it to be something great.
Cool. So somebody, a CEO of a company, once told me that, well, it's hard to assess a job of a CEO. So I didn't understand it then, but now I start to feel like, I start to look at it as when a software engineer write a few lines of code and get something to work properly. Yeah, that's a good day for him. He's going to mark it as a happy day. Yeah. For you, your job is more like enabling people or the organization to kind of work and do the right things. Mm-hmm. That's pretty much hard to assess on a daily basis, for example. Because it takes a good amount of time for you to be able to see something working. So how do you?
Yes and no. I think in the past that used to be the case because data used to sit in pockets, and then people had to mine it, and then they presented a retrospective view of what's going on. Nowadays, man, like with the cloud, data is no longer privilege, right? It's no longer something you have to bring in a consulting firm to do a multi-million-dollar project to activate for you, and even then, it's still retrospective. So in our organization, we have real-time data across our whole customer life cycle. And as a result, you can tell almost instantly whether something's working or not.
Right.
So that's one. And then the next thing is like data transparency, right? So, can other teams see what other teams are producing and what the indicators are that's happening too? And then, so that level of transparency is also just change management, right? It's, you're no longer like, putting your arm around somebody and telling them that, like, hey, just keep going. The numbers speak for themselves. And you're having a very sort of coaching, like, hey, how can we get this to the right place type discussions, and very problem solving, right? We've seen the problem, like, now how do we ramp this up to the next level? Right. So that's a big difference. And then on the team itself and cohesion and engagement and all these things, once again, data plays a big role. We use a tool called Office Vibe, which once a week asks every member of the team a single question around their engagements, right? And they answer it, and they complete a survey. They can make an anonymous comment, and this aggregates all this information into a sort of an aggregate score. And we can actually see, like, internally as a company, like how we're doing, what's the mood, like, and you, for instance, if there's a lack of alignment on something, you'll start seeing the comments coming in, like, I don't understand why this is happening, or I'd like to know more details about this, and then we can very quickly address whatever needs to happen. So data has changed everything, and so is the internet, right? Yeah. It's just a question of how you use it. And for sure at Yoco, the golden thread, whether it's our customers, our customer journey, or our employee lifecycle, is data.
Cool. So it's now more about making decisions quickly, I guess.
Correct. So making decisions quickly, it's about being responsive, right? It's amazing when you're looking at what's happening right now, not what happened, right? It's very different. And I guess this is probably one of the most challenging things for traditional organizations, especially larger ones, right? This is what they're going to be competing against, and this is how they need to start tooling themselves, because this is the new reality. And then I guess there's all this talk about artificial intelligence, right, and machine learning and the like, and that's the next evolution. So we're looking at what's happening right now, and we're having to make decisions in the not too distant future, machines will be doing that for us. And for us, if we're not starting to think about that and starting to put real plans, we'll get wiped out.
Sure.
Right? So we're already like starting to think what's coming to disrupt us, and it's definitely around this topic.
Sure. So what's your daily routine like? Like, what's the first thing you do first when you wake up? Do the very last thing.
So first of all, I try not to keep a routine. It just doesn't work for my mind. So no 2 days are the same for me. And that's once again an insight from my corporate days. Drove me crazy, right? It just didn't inspire creativity.
Yes.
But yeah, I guess sort of a typical day is coming in, looking at my messages, making sure that like I'm not blocking anything. Obviously, a few decisions flow through me, and the last thing I ever want is to be a roadblock in anything. That's sort of one of my number one priorities, is to ensure that I'm being responsive to people waiting on stuff from me. And then, I guess sort of looking at performance from the previous day, how things are going, and just generally ensuring that there's alignment, right? That's my number one job, is ensure that the teams are aligned. And I'm very passionate about organization design, and that's probably one of the things I spend one of the time thinking about. Like, are we structured to deliver the greatest customer experience?
Yeah.
And that in turn drives bottom line.
And at the end of the day, do you have like a certain time that you start? Like, say, okay, maybe a few minutes before this. No,
it never starts, man.
But what time do you typically go to bed?
Midnight, 1 a.m. Yeah.
And waking up?
Waking up, I'm typically up around 7 a.m.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah. So,
that's pretty hectic.
Hey man, like you have to do it. Yeah.
Okay, and this is unrelated probably, but what do you think of cryptocurrency? Do you have any insights on that?
No insights per se. I think it's an interesting space. I think, there's the currency itself and the store of value, and then there's the payment facilitation, right? And up until now, it's been sort of a trading store of value play. We often get asked like, what happens when this starts becoming a payment facilitation play, and how does that impact us, right? And our answer is always the same, that we're not a card company, right? We're a merchant acquisition platform. We're a software company. We've designed our platform to be agnostic of any particular digital payment type, right? We will always support whatever's relevant in a particular market. So, here is card because of card penetration amongst adults. In the rest of the continent, mobile money is real. We've all integrated into our platform. Whatever works, we don't mind, right? What we don't want is a situation where our merchants are having to manually reconcile payments into the system. It's just a waste of time.
Yes. And what does Yoco mean? Is it just a name? Or?
Yeah. So Yoco is an acronym for Your Commerce.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Who came up with that?
So once again, these things like iterate over time.
Yeah.
It just sort of started happening over time, and
Right.
Yeah.
And how close are you guys, like the co-founders? Are you like a buddy type of
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we've known each other a long time. We've been working a long time together. It's a great advantage, where we could be working on the most complex thing together, jointly, and we just have to say a few words to each other. We all know who's doing what and who's gonna gravitate. It's really, I enjoy it a lot. Like, I barely have to delegate to the guys, right? Because they know what they need to do.
Cool.
And that's a great position to be in, actually. Yeah.
Cool, man. Thanks for your time. Really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
That's cool. Thank you.
Right.
Okay.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from this. And if you found this helpful and you want to continue listening to the Grey F podcast, all you can do is subscribe, and you can do that in many ways. Number one, being on iTunes, search the Grey F podcast and subscribe, and you can give me a review, a 5-star review, and that will help a lot. And then you will get each and every episode coming up. You can do the same on SoundCloud if you're listening on SoundCloud. You can also do this on Stitcher Radio or TuneIn. We're pretty much on every platform. And you can also do this directly from my website, which is www.greatjabesi.com. And from there, you find a sign-up form just immediately after you arrive on the website. You put in your email address, then you be on my email list. That means you also receive questions or special emails about what kind of questions can I ask the next coming guest, which is, I think, the best way to get involved on the podcast. As well, keep in mind that you can download each and every episode that I've ever done here. We have done 50 episodes, and listen to it on your own time. You can do that on all the platforms that I've mentioned, and you can do it on your mobile device or on your computer. So stay awesome, stay unicorning. Goodbye, and good luck.